Hey beautiful people, how are we all? Welcome back to the pod. I hope that everybody's doing great and that Feb has treated you spectacularly so far. I will keep the yap brief today because there's a lot that I want to get through, but it is 9:15 on Saturday night. I've spent all day with my band. My stomach is full of the best mac and cheese that I think I've ever had in my life, courtesy of Boyd, and I'm feeling like it's a great day to be alive and to jump on a microphone and complain about societal attitudes. I'm really keen to record this episode today for a number of reasons. First being that it's a really personal one to me, and I want to talk about topics and narratives that I have wrestled with almost every day of my adult life so far. The second being that I think they're topics that are still being under-discussed, and I think deciding that I have thoughts worth putting out there is a big step in the right direction for my self-worth and respect. The title pretty much sums up what I want to talk about, but just as a heads up for anybody who might need it before I start, I am going to talk about part of my own experience with self-harm briefly, not as a deep dive into the topic by any means, but just because it's relevant to a point that I want to discuss. I'll put a timestamp in the episode description for anybody who just wants to skip that part. But if you don't want to listen to the entire episode, that's also completely cool. Now's your chance to switch off and put somebody else cool on. If you need any other podcast ideas, check out Sad to Savage. Quick shout out to Shelby. She hasn't had a mention in a while, which I think is well overdue. I'm going to start with a few short stories from my life, including what happened on my only day of work at the job that I quit in December, which I mentioned really briefly last episode. Story number 1. I had a boyfriend for about 6 months over the ages of 16 and 17, who I was completely infatuated with at the time. I don't think I ever left the little teenage lovesick honeymoon phase bubble before he very unceremoniously dumped my ass and left to go to uni. And I was absolutely devastated, cried myself to sleep, stalking his socials and his ex's socials and the socials of girls that he was tagging in his pictures, devastated. For a year afterwards, I would continuously be going over and over every interaction that we'd ever had again in my head, questioning what I'd done wrong and why I couldn't be likeable or interesting or pretty enough for him to keep me around. But for the first 3 days after we'd broken up especially, I was absolutely inconsolable. I was crying all the time. I could barely eat or sleep. And on the third day after my dumping, I was bawling my eyes out in the shower before school, and once I was out and dressed, somebody in my house told me that I was being very self-indulgent and that I needed to stop. Somebody who'd never experienced being a heartbroken teenager without giving me any advice on how to cope with it or how to stop expressing my emotions in that way. And then about a year later, during which, looking back on, I think I was depressed, I was told by the same person that my constant bad mood was bringing everybody else in the house down, and they asked me what was going on, what it was about, and amongst other things I said that I was struggling with a breakup and ultimately the aftermath of a relationship which just had not been good for me. And their response was to say that there were children my age in Africa struggling through much more horrific problems, and that at some point I just needed to get over it, again without giving me any advice as to how to actually do that. Story number 2. I've told this story before, so I'll stick to the shortened version. But during COVID, a teacher at my university told my class that she didn't think we were working hard enough and that she didn't understand why our generation had lost the drive to work as hard as we could with what we were lucky enough to have, and that we should all be grateful that we weren't on life support. And then the other teacher in my class chimed in and said that at our age, she'd been in a practice room at 6 o'clock every morning practicing with the rats. Number 3. Last year, about 4 months before I was supposed to graduate, for reasons somewhat unbeknownst to me still, I did a complete 180 mentally, and I went from a place where I felt like I was thriving to the absolute pits. And whether it would have been called severe burnout or depression or anxiety again, I don't know. But I was living in a near constant state of dread. I was crying every day. I felt consistently anxious and like my heart was pounding and like I couldn't breathe before university classes. I was genuinely struggling at times to read. Like I would get emails through and I would go over and over the same page again and again and just not be able to take anything in or comprehend anything. And I was forgetting key bits of information, like the notes of scales and pieces that I learnt when I was 15, things that were normally second nature. And I just wasn't getting any joy out of anything anymore. I told the people around me that I didn't feel stable and that I wanted a break from the work and the pressure that I felt I was under above anything else. And I came to the conclusion that I would rather drop out of the course that I had spent 5 years on, 4 months before graduating, than let myself get back to the place that I was in mentally before I had my psychotic breakdown. Which, looking back on now, I still think was 100% a sensible and brave way to think about the situation, because that was a really, really difficult conclusion to come to. Not only because, in a sense, it felt like I would be letting myself down and falling short if I didn't finish the degree that close to the end, but also because I knew what that would make certain other people think about me. But I had other adults in my life telling me that I was crazy to consider dropping out that close to the finishing line, and that anybody else who validated my thought processes around the reasons why I wanted to drop out was crazy and ill-informed and shouldn't be offering me their opinion or advice at all, and that part of life was just learning how to get through hard things, in the full knowledge that I'd had that same advice when I was 19 and it had led to a real psychotic mental breakdown. Number 4, somebody told me that they thought that my generation had gotten life all wrong and that we weren't supposed to be happy most of the time and life wasn't supposed to be filled with joy and fulfillment. You were meant to feel shit and sacrifice and slog away at your job most of the time so that you could enjoy your small pockets of happiness, which to me just translated as your job's meant to be horrible, you're meant to feel shit most of the time, and it is expected of you to just live for the weekend. It was almost like you have to spend most of your time making sacrifices to earn those small glimmers of happiness. Number 5, after I had that huge wobble in March and decided essentially that I wasn't going to finish the course, I did do some brainstorming and I came up with some ways that would make me feel empowered to finish it on my own terms. So I got my exams delayed. I didn't do them in June, I did them in September, and around the end of August I was talking to a teacher that I had at uni about my post-exam plans, and I said that at that point I just wanted a break above anything else. And she said, "Oh, another one," and laughed, which I assumed to be in reference to the year that I took out when I was ill. Now, I'm absolutely sure that they had no ill intent whatsoever when saying that, and they are definitely not responsible for my emotional reaction to it, but what they said did really hit a nerve, and I thought about it obsessively for days afterwards, and I felt quite ashamed and guilty for the fact that I wanted time out. I questioned whether it made me weak or whether it meant that I lacked emotional resilience, or whether it made me a spoiled, privileged brat to think that I deserved the luxury of time off. Number 6, last month I went to my first day of work at a corner store and post office. I'd worked at a post office before in my year out, which was 4 years ago, and I worked there sporadically on the weekends and at holidays after I'd gone back to uni. But that stopped about 2 years ago, so I have not worked at a post office in 2 years. When I got there on that first day, I was put straight onto the till, and it was the busiest week in December for the post office. There was a queue of customers outside the door the whole time that I was there, and I really struggled to remember where to find different things on the till, what the exact processes were, because the way that the post office runs is extremely thorough, and you always have it drilled into you that basically you do not want to get anything wrong, because if anything does go wrong with large amounts of money, you could be liable for it. Basically what happened was the more that I asked for help, the more pissed off the other 2 women that I was working with seemed to be getting, and after about an hour of being there, I could hear them both whispering about me and my incompetence within literally 2 meters of me. And I tried to extend an olive branch and talk to them about the situation, but it just seemed to make one of them even angrier, and she responded with what was arguably passive aggression or even straight up hostility. I asked to speak to the boss because things were getting so tense and going so badly in the little post office booth, and unfortunately I ended up in tears in front of him, which I was absolutely mortified about, and I was just met with zero sympathy or understanding. So I asked if I could go home and try again on my next shift. Then after sleeping on it, I sent him a text saying that, look, I'm really sorry, I do not think this job is for me. And the last one. Last week I read an article on the Independent Online titled Generation Anxious, which was debating whether my generation, young people, were over-medicalising their struggles and whether increasing awareness around mental health was causing people to become unable to differentiate between everyday struggles and real mental illness. In regards to that article, it was an interesting read for me for so many reasons, and I don't want to get too into the specifics of it because that would take 30 minutes in itself, and I don't want this podcast to be a media analysis, but I do want to talk about how I felt after reading it, which, in all honesty, was like somebody had taken a sledgehammer to my biggest sore spot. I find the discussion of the legitimacy of anybody else's mental health struggles extremely upsetting, probably mostly because I have felt extremely invalidated and unsupported at numerous points along the way of my own mental struggles. And so there were certain bits of it that provoked quite a strong reaction in me, like, for example, there was a suggestion in it that employers assess for themselves how serious their employees' problems actually are. Like always, I'll link it in the episode description for anybody who is interested in reading it or getting more context. For years, I've had this voice in my head which has been created by a combination of my own thoughts and the opinions of family members and my peers and staff at the schools that I've been to and my university, and articles and social media posts made by people I don't know online. And it tells me that people like me are doing society an injustice and are entitled, and that other people are suffering because of my inability to suffer and grind and to stop whining about my illegitimate problems. I just want to talk about it today and try and unpack some of those cruel narratives that I've been carrying with me like badges of shame for far too long, in the hopes that firstly, maybe it reaches somebody who has been or is struggling through similar thoughts, and that it can make them feel seen or heard or understood, or just less alone. But also I hope that it can empower them to see things from a different perspective that is happier and comes from a place of love. I also know that stoicism and suck it up culture at work and in our society in general is a very different topic to mental health issues and mental illness, but I want to talk about them together because of the effect that the former has had on my own mental health, but also because I think it's an attitude that extends outside of and often seeps out of the workplace and education system and is frequently projected specifically onto people struggling with their mental health. As in, I think a lot of the people who adapt the value of soldier on through anything at any cost will take it from anywhere between stop crying over your breakup because other people have worse problems to stick at your miserable job because that's how life's supposed to be, all the way to you need to push yourself through mental illness and or burnout because life requires you to do hard things, and if other people have to, you do too. Whether they're talking about working conditions that we should be able to push through and endure, to how we should treat ourselves and expect to be treated by others when we're struggling mentally, the continuous narrative seems to me to be that expressing or even having emotions and not keeping everything under a tight lid and wanting more for yourself than a miserable life is somehow wrong. And I think it's rubbish, and I want to tell a different story with my life, and I hope above anything else that more of us can move towards rising above this pressure to stay miserable and dare to want something better for ourselves as well. I have a lot of thoughts around the sentiment that young people as a whole are over medicalising their problems now. Because I think if you can't tell me how to not do that or give me any advice as to how to cope with my problems, then who are you to tell me what I should or should not be able to do? Because if you cannot tell me how to not over-medicalise life's ups and downs and how to cope with the things that I'm struggling with and how to do all these things that according to you, young people should just be able to do because you did, then who are you to tell me that I should just be able to do it? Because if you cannot tell me how to do it, that either means that you don't know how to do it or you have an incomplete understanding of how or why you're doing it yourself. You may or may not know what is actually pushing or pulling you towards engaging in those behaviours and lifestyle. To me, advice given without action steps or self-awareness is illegitimate advice, which I think when given with false authority can be really harmful because plenty of vulnerable or influenceable people will feel obligated to follow that. The second gripe I have with it is that people will say that others are over-medicalising their problems and that we, for some reason, have a right to assess the seriousness of each other's struggles until they have somebody with a real and serious and potentially fatal mental health issue on their hands. And I don't think it is that easy at all to establish when somebody has crossed the line from struggling with life in overwhelmed territory into struggling with a serious mental health issue territory. Especially because I do think there is still, unfortunately, a lot of stigma around speaking up about mental health issues, specifically the more unconventional or less common ones. And also because young people especially, who are the ones being accused of this over-medicalisation in the article, are the ones who have had the least time and life experience on their side to develop the confidence and communication skills to accurately communicate what they are going through. And also just because it is so hard sometimes to admit how bad things actually are. Certainly my experience was that to the outside looking in, I was just a struggling teenager for about 7 years until I declined into a full-blown psychotic breakdown over the span of about 3 days. But in reality, that breakdown had probably been 7 years coming, and I think if my cries for help had been taken more seriously before that stage, I might not have gotten to the point that I did. We shouldn't be waiting until a mental health issue has reached the point of becoming potentially immediately fatal to take it seriously or start treating it, or until somebody has started displaying uncomfortable or unconventional symptoms like psychosis, or even until somebody's made an attempt on my life, because mental health issues always have the potential to develop into something serious or fatal. You never hear people saying that they don't want to over-medicalise a physical ailment. You wouldn't detect cancer in somebody and say, actually, we're going to wait a bit to start treating that because it might not kill you and we think your body needs to learn to develop a bit of resilience. Because that sounds insane. You would start treating it immediately. I'm not for 1 minute trying to compare cancer to any mental illness in terms of seriousness. I'm just trying to illustrate how drastically differently we treat physical ailments and mental ailments. You know, you won't go to the doctors with an unusual mole that has grown and changed in colour and have them say, well, might not turn out to be fatal, might not be cancer, might not do you any harm, so we're just going to leave it and gamble and see if it does. I use that example because I went to the doctors with an unusual mole that had grown and changed blue when I was 15 or 16, and they didn't know at first whether it was going to be dangerous or not, but they removed it and tested it anyway. I wasn't guilted or shamed by anybody for raising concerns about it, and in fact I remember looking over my doctor's shoulder at the notes that he was writing to the colleague that he was referring to, and he called me a sensible girl in it. But in stark contrast, when I confided in an adult that I'd been self-harming, I got told that it was a Western phenomenon and a learnt behaviour, and that they didn't want other children around me exposed to it, which felt extremely invalidating and lacking in empathy or concern. I felt completely dismissed and like people just thought I was doing it for attention and like it was more of an irritant for people around me than an indicator that I desperately actually needed some attention and help. So the response to me speaking up about my active and concerning health struggles was the complete opposite to the praise that I received for speaking up about my physical health concern, which was yet to show any signs of actually being dangerous. It wasn't the only time that something like that happened to me, and I've also just been witness to far too many conversations where people have felt far too comfortable discussing another person who has spoken up about struggling mentally and how truthful they were being or not, or whether or not they were over-dramatising their struggles. I've also heard people boldly declare that burnout is made up and just isn't real, even though it has actually been declared as an occupational syndrome by the World Health Organization. I do think there is a concerning trend amongst people with a certain shared mindset that if you cannot see somebody's health problem, it means that they're either making it up or they're choosing not to do anything about it and let it continue to affect them for some sort of gain. Like getting out of or having an excuse for lack of performance in work or school, which is an extremely dangerous opinion to vocalise because I think it shuts people off from the help and support that they desperately need. As for a discussion around self-harm, in cases where people suspect somebody is doing it purely for attention, I personally cannot wrap my head around the mentality of, instead of focusing on why somebody is so attention-starved that they are doing something so drastic to get attention, or why somebody has felt so dismissed and unbelieved to the fact that they felt they needed to do something so drastic and attention-grabbing in order to get taken seriously, we instead put all of our attention on the fact that, oh, but it's attention-seeking and we like to think of that as a negative thing. And we then punish or scold or berate it as such because as a society collectively we do not like attention seekers or even people taking up space, even if they are taking up that space to literally scream for help. Like, I genuinely think if somebody is self-harming purely for attention, so what? Not so what that they're doing it, but so what that they are doing it for attention. So what if that's their motive? Surely the bit that we should be more concerned about is why they feel they need that attention so badly, or what it is that they're trying to draw the attention to that is so urgent that they feel the need to physically hurt themselves. Just because an idea is generally accepted by a large group of people, like the notion that self-harming is an attention-seeking and grabbing behaviour and we should frown upon it, it doesn't mean that that notion or belief or attitude is coming from a good or loving place, which again is why I want to talk about it, because I think it can be really hard not to question whether you've gotten it all wrong if you are consistently being exposed to loud, opposing and invalidating opinions. And I want people to know that there are people out there who will believe you and believe that you do need and deserve the help and support that you're looking for, and that needing and asking for that compassion doesn't make you any less of a person or any more of a weak person, it makes you strong. And yeah, theoretically, I can understand that there are probably some people seeing this increase in mental health awareness content on social media and more language around it and going through a shit week and then thinking, oh crap, I'm depressed. Like, in a world as big as our one with such a huge population, completely accept that there are probably some cases of that happening. Especially because I think with things like that, when the idea seed has been planted, the more you think about it, the more it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But, and that is like a huge glaring but, that doesn't make their pain any less real, and it doesn't change the fact that they are suffering and do not know what to do about it. Telling them to just get a grip because their problem isn't as bad as a real mental health issue without giving them any advice as to how to get said grip isn't going to do anything other than add to their pain. In my opinion, the focus should not be on whether people are using the correct language or whether their response to the events that have happened to them is proportionate or not. If we're coming from a place of love, surely the focus should be on helping them feel less miserable about their situation and get to a happier state. And that is regardless of how dramatic we have personally judged their response to be, because I do not think we are ever in a position to judge the validity of another person's suffering. Literally everybody is living on this planet for the first time and doing the best to get through life with the knowledge that they have. And if you can't give them any advice or do anything to help them do that, then what use is you telling them that they're over-medicalising their problems and therefore they just have to get on with it? I don't think that helps ease anybody's suffering. I think it just adds to it by invalidating people and contributing to their shame. Another thing that you would literally never do is tell somebody to get over having their finger chopped off because somebody else has lost an arm. The severity of somebody else's struggles does not diminish the validity of your own. So the fact that some people have lived with chronic mental illness for decades and others may or may not have self-diagnosed, in my opinion, shouldn't matter, because the person who has self-diagnosed is still a struggling human being in need of love and help and support. And everybody deserves that. Also, it is just not worth the risk of dismissing someone who is actually genuinely on the verge of something potentially irreversible because you have judged from the tiny sliver of their life that you've seen that they don't have a problem and they don't deserve any further support. And I, for one, don't think I've ever met somebody who is misusing medical terms and would genuinely benefit from just being told to suck it up and stop whining and stop making themselves miserable and just to get on with it. I think if we all just treated the issue with a lot more compassion, it would become slightly, if not severely, less widespread anyway. The world doesn't need more judgment, it needs more empathy. And I think we could all do with collectively accepting a bit more how little understanding we have of other people's unique life experiences. Unless you personally have been through something, you will never understand exactly what it feels. And you can never go through somebody else's exact unique life experience because it is not physically possible for us to transport inside other people's brains and experience their lives through their unique perspectives and lens. Everybody's mental health struggles or experience of mental illness is going to look vastly different, and I think if we could all acknowledge that, we'd be much less likely to judge and feel the need to put our 2 pence in left, right and centre, and much more likely to actually seriously try to listen and understand and show up with compassion. Now, in terms of that job that I almost immediately quit, I really want to talk about it because in all honesty, it still really seriously bothers me and it gets my over-rumination prone brain ticking consistently. And if I've been through it, then somebody else has probably been through a similar thing and could do with hearing some of this. I felt a shit ton of guilt after leaving that job because I was thinking things along the lines of, am I just severely lacking in emotional resilience and was I obligated morally to give it another go, and maybe if I had have done it would have gotten better. But actually I think there's another way of looking at it, which is to say that it is a huge strength to trust and listen to your gut and be able to make quick decisions about what is going to make you happy and what is going to make you miserable, because that way you waste as little of your precious time in this life as possible in places and with people that just don't serve you. I think a big part of self-love and self-respect is acting in accordance to your strong gut feelings or intuition or whatever you want to call them as and when you have them. I do wonder whether I should have gone back the next day, and I know that there are certainly lots of things that I could have done differently. Like when I heard those women whispering about me, I could easily, very respectfully, have said, hey, just to let you know I can hear you, I'm feeling increasingly unwelcome, can we please have a conversation about what's going on? Instead of coming at it from the approach of, well, I'm just going to try and make them feel better and let them know that I understand and I'm not an enemy to them, because I thought that that was what was going to help diffuse the situation, but actually it seemed to just escalate it and make it worse and make them more pissed off, and in the process I kind of semi-abandoned myself by putting my own feelings and increasing distress on the back burner, like at the bottom of the priority list. In fairness to myself, my gut at the time was telling me that standing up for myself would potentially result in a kick-off or aggressive reaction, and in all honesty that probably has a lot to do with my own past trauma, so I'm really trying hard not to be hard on myself for letting that worry stop me from doing what was probably a more sensible thing to do in that moment. But also, I didn't know either of these women from Adam, and having seen one of them in particular get extremely angry and confrontational within an hour of being in the same room as me, I think it was fair enough to assume that that could be her reaction. And also, I just didn't want to cause a scene unnecessarily on my first day or make a big deal of it. Which, in hindsight, I ultimately do think it was a mistake, because saying, hey, I feel a bit unwelcome, could we please have a chat about it once this queue has died down, is not making a scene or being confrontational or being overdramatic. That is just communicating maturely. The thing is, I certainly do not expect or feel entitled to work into a new workplace and be treated like a long lost best friend who's returned, or to be mothered or coddled or handled with kid gloves. And in all honesty, I don't even respect to be treated with kindness, or to be given a smile, or talked to politely, or given an unbegrudging hand on my first day. I don't think I'm entitled to those things, but that works both ways. They're not obligated to give me that, but equally, I am not obligated to stay at a workplace that has made me feel miserable within 2 hours. And I do want to make it really clear that I fully understand how stressful it potentially could have been having somebody come in literally the busiest week in the year, who they thought was going to be fully trained and completely competent and be able to come in and help them, and then to realise that I wasn't as immediately apt as they thought I was going to be. Like, I get that, and I get that retail and hospitality can be brutal. And I also know that I have no clue whether any of those staff members was going through something particularly stressful, or whether the Christmas period in general was putting a strain on them, or whether I was just adding to their workload, which they hadn't been expecting and they were already exhausted. I just personally hate it when people are unkind to others, and as a way of excusing it, say to themselves or other people, oh, like, I'm sorry, I was just having a really bad day. Because if we all chose to live like that, we would all be miserable all of the time because of the domino effect. If I believe that it's okay to be unkind because I'm having a bad time, I could go out and be a bitch to somebody else, which would give them a hard day, which means that they're now not feeling good, so they're going to go and be unkind to somebody else, and the pattern just continues, and somebody has to be the one to stop it and say, I'm not going to project my bad mood or feelings or situation onto anybody else, because I don't want to continue that train of pain. So while I can imagine what may or may not have been happening behind the scenes, I still personally don't think it was pleasant to respond to the situation by being hostile to me. And regardless of what any of them may or may not have been dealing with that day, I am still not obligated to stay in a workplace where I am made to feel unwelcome for any reason. Also, if I'd have stayed longer, I might have missed out on the opportunity to get hired at the place that I'm at now, where everybody has been extremely kind and patient, even when they've been run off their feet. Nobody's been too busy to give me a hand or remind me of something, even if I've asked 5 times before. And I think I do a better job because I'm happy and because I'm not anxious or feeling like I'm walking on eggshells trying to avoid making a mistake and being socially shunned because of it. And because I'm happier, I'm more motivated to do my job well and chip in because it feels good to do my best. I don't think there are very many people who actively want to do a shit job at life and get away with doing as little as possible. And I think if they do, it probably makes them very unhappy, and they probably lack understanding and self-awareness of that. I think when most people experience that doing their best and living up to their potential makes them happier, they want to do it and they want to be in an environment that empowers them to do that. I also did feel somewhat spoiled for having the privilege of being able to up and quit when I felt like it, and there was a bit of me that felt like I therefore wasn't entitled to act on it. But when I think about it logically, I do just think, who wins from that line of thinking? My parents both work jobs helping people who are severely more disadvantaged than I have ever been, and I've often felt guilty because of that, and almost, and I know it's completely irrational, but almost like a bad person because I've had such a luxurious life that other people don't. And it's definitely been exacerbated by the fact that I've often felt like I have an inability to deal with pain. and it's like, how dare I be so weak when other people have to deal with so much more in comparison. But the thing that I consistently try to remind myself is that nobody wins from me causing myself unnecessary suffering and to waste the luck and the beautiful life that I have because of guilt would be a disrespect to the people who don't have what I have, because I'd be letting it go to waste. So now I just try to remind myself that I think surely the right thing to do is not take it for granted and make the most of it. So that was partly my thought process with the post office job. I felt guilty because I am fortunate enough to be in a position where if I hadn't have found a job for a while, it would have been okay, and financially my boyfriend Ed, who I live with, would have been able to provide for both of us, and it wouldn't have been a huge financial stressor on him. So I felt really guilty that I had that luxury that so many other people wouldn't have in that situation, but weirdly and irrationally I think that guilt made me feel like I shouldn't use it. But actually I think that to not make the most of it would have been worse, because like I said, nobody gains anything from my unnecessary suffering. And I've talked about this before, but I think the world becomes a much happier place on the whole when we individually make ourselves happier. I will be able to make much better use of this incredible life that I'm lucky enough to have if I am a happier and healthier person, which would have been much more difficult in a job that was making me feel miserable. Also, if I'm a happier person, I'm in a much better position to continue to learn and evolve in thought and try to contribute something and make this world a better place. So when people talk about my generation and how we've got this idea all wrong and life isn't supposed to be happy all the time and it's meant to be a shit slog and you live for weekends and then eventually you retire and die, I just think, how insane is that? Like, that is crazy for people to really be out there thinking that life shouldn't, for some reason, be filled with joy and happiness and fulfillment, and that's not the way things are supposed to be, and that's not the direction that we should be aiming to move towards. The world can go that way if we all start pushing it that way, and it bloody well should. Surely it can only be a good thing if more people start hoping for that and believing that it's possible and subsequently becoming the people to start pushing in that direction. Wanting the best for yourself doesn't automatically go hand in hand with being blind to other people's needs and quality of life, but in my experience people frequently do lump the two together, and people will say that if you want more for yourself and dare to pursue a fulfilling, meaningful life, and even if you want to work a job that you enjoy and experience financial security and freedom, you are therefore somehow selfish. It is a huge overgeneralization and assumption to make, and they are two very different things. You can want the best and a magical life for yourself and have absolutely every intention of helping other people out along the way and once you've gotten there. I really do have to tell myself this all the time, but nobody benefits from you staying unnecessarily miserable, and you're not doing anybody a favour by fulfilling some questionable martyr role. It's not like you're reducing anybody else's pain by struggling with them. And yeah, people can benefit from and find comfort in the knowledge that they're not alone in their struggles and other people are going through similar things, but I don't think that applies if you're inauthentically putting yourself through them. When you put it like that, artificially causing yourself suffering for the sake of other people feeling less alone, or to reduce your own guilt at feeling happy, sounds absolutely absurd. It's ridiculous. There are so many ways in which you can help other people and ease their suffering and contribute to their happiness, and none of them include artificially suffering alongside them, or even choosing to live the life that you've been blessed with but living it riddled with shame and guilt and self-loathing. There really isn't anything shameful about your luck. As to why this particular day affected me personally so much, I think that society gives us a vague set of values that we are encouraged, pushed, pressured, sometimes guilted into living by. I have always felt expected by family and teachers and peers and all of the people that I mentioned before to knuckle down and stiff upper lip it and get on with it and be hardworking at any cost. I feel expected still to live with a life's hard, get over it attitude, and I could hear that voice loud and clear shouting at me and ridiculing me for leaving that job. The importance of being hardworking above all else and somewhat emotionless or emotionally repressed alongside is one of the biggest lessons that I feel I've absorbed throughout my life, and is one that I will probably continue to spend years trying to get rid of. I personally believe that one of the most important things that you can do as an act of self-love is to take some time to actually consider what values you want to live by and how they differentiate from the values that you have consciously or subconsciously been living by up until this point. I do value hard work massively, and to put it dramatically, I take a lot of pride in getting up and striving every day to do the best that I can in whatever it is I do, because I care about contributing to humanity, because I love and care about other human beings deeply. I find us to be a fascinating species that I want to say I have a soft spot for. I think it's hard to be a human being and not have a soft spot for human beings, but then again, I talk to so many people who talk about how much they hate other people, and like, especially when people say that they prefer animals to humans, I don't think I can ever relate to that. I think I will always be somewhat in awe of humans and the human brain and of the society that we have created, and the fact that people compose these incredible elaborate symphonies and make these paintings and great works of art and write books, and that we have discovered so much about the world that we live in and managed to manipulate so much of it to make the world an incredible and more exciting and opportunity-filled place. This is very off script, as you can probably tell, but I care about people. I want to leave something behind in this world. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but I want to be of some benefit to society, which is potentially why I find it so painful to feel like I'm being perceived as somebody who is taking away from it instead of contributing. And I think it is really hard to acknowledge the fact that people think that because I'm trying to reduce my own suffering, I am doing that. I am creating a wound in society and in other human beings, because that is the last thing that I want to do. But I have also experienced a great amount of pain, and I'm tired of it. I've experienced life on the other end of the spectrum. I've experienced being extremely happy and grateful and just waking up every day not only in awe of the world and other people, but in awe of my own personal life. And I don't want to have to compromise on that again. I also get a great and personal sense of happiness and fulfillment from hard work on things that are deeply meaningful to me, like this podcast, albeit still very small and in the beginner learning stages. This to me is meaningful work, because occasionally I will get a message from somebody saying like, this has really helped, and that feels like I'm making small steps towards contributing to humanity and the society that I care so much about. But I do think there is a limit on how many core values you can have, because there are only so many things that you can prioritise at any one time, and at some point different values and priorities will start to clash with each other. I think I came to the gradual realisation that loving myself and prioritising my happiness above anything else was at consistent loggerheads with my internalised push through it, stiff upper lip it, carry on, slog at it through anything and above anything else attitude. And that's when I started to make frequent conscious changes, because if I had to pinpoint and verbalise what my 5 most treasured core values were, being hardworking would inevitably be crowded out by other things that I just think are more important. I've got 2 more little stories for you. Number 1, my ex-boyfriend, the sixth form boyfriend, once told me that he loved me because of how strong I was. And if I hadn't already decided that that was the ultimate personality trait to strive for before that point, that comment definitely solidified it as such. Number 2, years later, my best friend told me that she thought I was stoic, and whether it was true or not, I immediately felt intensely loved and admired and valued. I am genuinely really proud of myself to getting to a point where I no longer cling to those 2 comments like badges of honour, because I think it marks a significant shift in to living in alignment with my core values, as opposed to living in alignment to what I perceived external expectations of me to be. I don't think I ever truly wanted to be living in a way that placed stoicism and hard work and personal sacrifice at the top of my core values pyramid. But the fact that I clung on to those supposed compliments for such a long time so hard suggests that they were what I was actually prioritising, consciously or not. Whereas now I do think I can genuinely and truthfully say to myself that those values have been replaced with love and happiness and compassion. I think I'm finally starting to decide what my own core values are, instead of living by the ones that external influences put at the top of my pyramid for me. And I think I am a much better and happier and healthier person because of it. And I'm definitely a more loving one. Anybody listening to this may have a completely different set of personal values than either of the two that I've mentioned, but the message that I want to get across is that that's completely okay, and the choice is yours to make and should be yours to make. You do not have to continue to live in alignment to somebody else's moral compass, because the most valid moral compass to live your own unique life by is your own. It is possible to make your own mind up about what is important to you in this life and to start acting accordingly. And I became an infinitely happier person when I did this and started living my life on my own terms. Now, if I'm perceived as anything, I really hope it's as somebody who dares to want to be happy above being a high achiever or hardworking, because that is the example that I would want to set to the younger version of me and anybody else who may be observing my behaviour or taking note. And if I'm not quite there yet, that's alright, I just hope that I'm on the way. Before I finish, I just want to say that no positive achievement or action is too small to celebrate. And yes, whilst plenty of people do bigger, braver, harder, scarier things every day than walk out of a job that they've had for less than a day, it was still a big move for me. As somebody who has consistently bowed down to pressure to do things that deep down I know don't serve me. So I will applaud myself and call myself brave because, again, the extent of somebody else's achievements doesn't invalidate or diminish my own. I'm still going to pat myself on the back for it. Quitting isn't failure or giving up, and it doesn't make you weak. It's deciding that you deserve more, and in a society that often feels like it values stoicism and sacrifice and hard work above anything else, is an extremely strong and brave action to take. It is now 11 o'clock and I'm ready for bed, so I'm finishing there. Thank you so much if you've gotten up until this point, and like always, I hope that somebody was able to get something out of this or just feel more seen or understood. And if you did get anything out of it or you want to support me, then any kind of engagement would be amazing for me and the discoverability of the podcast. So following, subscribing, thumbs up, star rating, comment and review, any or all of the above. Go for whatever you please. But again, thank you, and I love you so much, and I will talk to you really soon. Bye.